Well, you made it. Happy Friday and welcome to the Gold and Black Radio pregame show. I'm your host, Derek Schultz. Purdue turns the page from, as you know, an historically ugly afternoon to pack up the wagon and head west to Oregon, where they hopefully aren't going to have to battle dysentery or the measles like the 1980s computer game that I played back in grade school, but they will have to take on a Beavers team that will also be licking its wounds after a humbling home rivalry loss last week to an in-state rival. Today's show will break down the matchup between Purdue and Oregon State. We'll provide some analysis and historical perspective as well. But before we get started, Gold and Black Radio is brought to you by our friends at the Purdue Federal Credit Union, a proud partner of Purdue Athletics and the official credit card for Purdue fans. Boiler Up, East End Grill, and Ripple & Company, two distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street, the perfect place for your next event. And our pals at the Whitaker Inn for unparalleled comfort and cuisine. Visit the Whitaker Inn. Joining us now is Tom Dienhart, who is, of course, going to make the Oregon Trail trip out to Corvallis. Unlike a lot of us, Tom, you were a national guy for a long time, right? So you've been everywhere. And I know it's funny. I'm going out there too. I have the opportunity to fill in for the great Kelly Kitchell. Big shoes to fill, both literally and figuratively, right? Especially for somebody my size. But you've had the opportunity to go just about everywhere, but you've spoke very highly of Corvallis, and I've heard from everybody it's just a picturesque place for a college football game at night.
Yeah, you're not going to damage that pregame press box buffet like Kelly Kitchell, so they'll thank you from Oregon State. Yeah, it's kind of a quaint little town. Reminds me of West Lafayette a lot, Derek. That's why I sort of have an affinity for Corvallis, just about an hour south of Portland. They got Oregon State, Indiana, Purdue. Oregon State's always in the shadow of Oregon, as you can imagine, but a real plucky program. I'm always kind of an underdog guy, Derek. I always like the underdog. And Oregon State typically has been and still always is an underdog. And if you're a college football fan, you knew in the early 2000s when Dennis Erickson was there, that the teams that he put together, then Mike Riley, Derek, had a heck of a run. There were a lot of NFL players and a cool little venue too. So, it's going to be hostile, I think, on Saturday at 5:30 Pacific time, Derek. It ought to be quite a game, and I think the weather's going to be pretty good too, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, Chad Ochocinco, I guess he would have been Chad Johnson back in those days, right? TJ Hushmanzada.
Steven Jackson, the big Rams running back.
Yeah, that's right. Derek Anderson, who had that one great year in Cleveland. There were a lot of NFL guys. But you mentioned, Tom, so many similarities between these programs right now, both coming off tough home losses, tough to say the least for Purdue. I mean, a historic home loss to Notre Dame to a rival. Both breaking in relatively new coaches. Of course, Ryan Walters in year 2, Trent Bray in year 1. Mm-hmm. Both teams want to run the ball. And I think both teams have to kind of feel like this is a game. Look, Oregon State's slate is a lot more forgiving than Purdue's slate from here. But I think because they're at home, it's got to be a game that they feel like they have to get their season back on track, similar to Purdue.
Yeah, I think they're still kind of looking to prove themselves, too. They played Idaho and San Diego State. I think they felt those really weren't that competitive of matchups, and they got the ultimate team in Oregon, right? And they got it handed to them last week in Corvallis by the Ducks, 49-14. So, you know what, more than anything, Derek Schultz, I think the Beavers would love nothing more than to punch a Big Ten team right in the nose. The Big Ten, of course, was the death knell to their home of over 100 years, the Pac-12. Of course, it started with USC and UCLA. Then a couple of summers ago, we had Oregon, and then Washington followed the Ducks to the Big Ten. That really spelled the doom of the Pac-12, Derek. It still obviously is around. They've added some teams recently we've seen in the news, but still, the Pac-12, as we know it growing up, is no more. It's never going to be the same. And the Beavs and Wazoo, Washington State got left behind. And Derek, here's your chance to slug one of the teams from the conference that was at the heart of destroying what was, I think, just a terrific league.
Yeah, and this is not to insult Oregon State, but let's face it, they were knocked down a peg because of this. I mean, they're basically in a glorified, rebranded. They can call it whatever they want. They can call it the Pac-12 again if they want. It's the Mountain West, essentially. Yeah, I mean, that's what they're playing in, and that's not their fault. And it's a proud fan base, and they're salty about it, and they should be. But they were, I mean, if you're making a list of the biggest losers of conference realignment, certainly it's Oregon State and Washington State, no question.
You feel bad. We talked a little bit about the brief history of Oregon State. Washington State, of course, my gosh, you talk about great quarterback lineage. Drew Bledsoe and Ryan Leaf by themselves, Mark Rippon, just some terrific signal calls, some great teams. Mike Price got that team to the Rose Bowl. So I feel bad. Again, another underdog program, Washington State, way out there in Pullman, in eastern Washington. It's too bad. Like you said, Derek, you can put whatever label you want on it. It's just a glorified Mountain West now. And I'll still be rooting for it. But again, you do feel for Oregon State and Washington State in particular. And like I said, in this instance for Purdue, this is, like I said, an Oregon State team looking to punch up a little bit and punch out a Big Ten team. And Derek, Las Vegas thinks that the Beavers are going to do it too.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw 6 points. I haven't looked at it in a couple of days, but that might have been the opening line. But I saw Oregon State giving Purdue 6 points, which probably isn't a surprise considering I know things got away, but they were at least competitive for a half against Oregon. Purdue wasn't even competitive for a full minute, I don't think, in that game against Notre Dame, unfortunately. I do find it interesting, Tom, in looking, like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert on Oregon State, but, looking at their game so far, they actively play 2 quarterbacks. Now, Giovanni McCoy, who was a former FCS National Freshman of the Year, he's the number 1, and he plays the lion's share. He's the bell cow, but they sprinkle in Jabari Johnson. He's a former top 100 recruit. He transferred in from Missouri. And I just find that interesting because when I talk about multiple quarterbacks, obviously Purdue fans have a lot of experience with that, with all those, Marv and Turbush and Henry years, and then even into the, the Darrell Hazel era with Austin Appleby and Danny Etling and David Blau. I mean, it just felt like it was a constant carousel. So I don't think we're going to see like a straight quarterback sharing situation, but something to look out for Saturday's game is that, Oregon State has 2 guys that they like and they want to play them both.
Some deep cuts there, Derek. Very impressive knowledge there of the Boilermakers under Danny Hope and company. But yeah, you're right. Another dynamic for this defense, this much maligned Boilermaker defense to prepare for. The Beavers love it, right? You don't know what they're going to do, but I do know one thing for sure, Derek, doing some of my research, talking to the writer up there in particular as well, and Corvallis, that this team wants to run the football, my friend. They want to run it. They go extended stretches without throwing a pass. If you can't stop the run, they're going to keep feeding the rock to their backs. They got 2 good ones. So Purdue had struggles last weekend. I know that was Notre Dame, a whole cut above. That running back Jones was terrific for the Irish. But again, the Beavs are going to test him. They watch film, Derek. They know weaknesses. They're going to attack those weaknesses. They're going to see if Purdue can stop them. And they're going to try to set up some play action passes off those if the Boys try to get too frisky with crowd in the box. So a lot of gamesmanship. It'll be a lot of fun to see how the Boilermaker defense responds. And Derek, the offense, my gosh, plenty for that offense to prove here coming up on Saturday. And Purdue needs to play, I think Ryan Walters put it best in coaching parlance, complimentary football. Yeah. And that was non-existent on Saturday.
How intrigued are you, Tom, just to see how they respond in general? I mean, it wasn't just an offense thing or a defense thing or a coaching thing. I mean, it really was a team-wide catastrophe. I mean, I don't even think that that might be understating it. I mean, an historic loss to Notre Dame last week. How intrigued are you to see? Because we don't have a track record here with Ryan Walters, right? This is game 15.
Yeah.
He hasn't been through something like this before, and to then go across the country and go on the road against another worthy opponent like Oregon State and how the Boilers respond.
Yeah, catastrophic is probably not too strong of a word. I think nobody really expected Purdue to win, right? Let's be serious. I mean, I thought it was going to be this competitive, like most people, maybe a fourth quarter game. The Irish have a late drive to win it. This thing from the opening gun was not even competitive, like you said. That was what was disconcerting. It was like they weren't even ready to play. How could you not be ready to play that opponent in that environment with so much at stake? So again, I guess one of the keys I put in my prediction for tomorrow on the website is a key for Purdue is going to be a fast start, because I think they need early success. I'm assuming their confidence is lagging. There's some self-doubt. It's got to be running through these guys, Derek, no matter what they say publicly. They need early success. What if they get punched in the nose right away by Oregon State? What if they come out, Purdue throws a pick six or has a turnover? Oregon State scores a quick touchdown. Then to the shoulder slump, there's that collective sigh. Here we go again. So, yeah, I don't know how they're going to respond. It's still, like you said, a young coaching tenure for Ryan Walters. Adversity strikes all of us in life, my friend. That's how we are defined, is how we respond to adversity, not how we respond when things are going well. And Purdue is definitely at a crossroads right now. It sounds crazy, Derek. September 19th, 20th. We're talking about a crossroads game, a must-win game. But I don't know if you agree or not, but I don't think that's too strong of a statement either.
No, I mean, looking ahead, if they don't win on Saturday, then you got to wonder when the next win is going to come, honestly, looking at the slate that Purdue, and it's a very, very rigorous schedule that they have in front of them. Tom, we'll have the chance to talk a little bit more with you about the matchup coming up a little bit later on in the show, but you had the chance to talk to the Oregon State side of things with Les Garrett of the Corvallis Gazette-Times to preview the Beavers, and we'll bring you that conversation here in just a second. First, we want to shout out our friends at Sand Valley Resort, proud to bring you Gold and Black Radio each Friday. Celebrate all that the wilderness provides this fall and winter at Sand Valley. Experience everything from Thanksgiving dinner, curling and ice hockey to ice fishing and snowshoeing, and even the restorative benefits of a guided cold plunge in frozen lakes. How about that? Start planning your next winter giveaway by visiting sandvalleypursuits.com. Here's Tom's conversation from earlier with Les Garrett of the Corvallis Gazette-Times.
All right. Very pleased to be joined all the way from Corvallis, Oregon. Beautiful Corvallis, Oregon. Les Garrett of the Corvallis Gazette-Times. Les, thank you for joining us. You're going to drop some Oregon State Beaver knowledge on us. The Boilermakers are making their way west. Going to play in Corvallis against the Beavs on Saturday. I guess a good place to start would be kind of tell our viewers, our listeners, what they can expect from the Oregon State offense.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. On offense, Oregon State's they're looking to run the ball. There's no real surprise in that. If you look at any of the tape from the first two games, the Idaho State game, the San Diego State game, they ran the ball effectively, and they had large stretches of the game where they didn't even throw the ball at all. 10 plus play drives without a single pass. If they're able to get started running on Saturday, they're not afraid to just keep doing that. Style points don't really matter. They need to get back on the winning way after kind of getting rolled a little bit last Saturday. So I think they're going to do what they feel comfortable with, and that's run the ball.
Yeah, no shame in losing to the Oregon Ducks in the Civil War game. Purdue's licking its own wounds, obviously. Now, Les, kind of tell our viewers what to expect from the Oregon State defense.
I wish I knew. That's a really good question. I had this game circled on my calendar early in the summer because I felt like this was the first game where we were going to get an honest look at what this Oregon State team is. They were playing two teams in their first two games that they had a significant talent advantage on. I don't know how much you learn in games like that, playing Idaho State and a San Diego State team that's they're not the team they've been in the past. They're down. And then I don't know what you learn when you go up against, maybe as close to as talented a team as there's going to be in the country in Oregon. That was not a competitive football game in the second half on Saturday. So to a certain extent, we don't really know what this Oregon State defense is yet. They haven't really picked on somebody their own size yet. And I know that this isn't a great Purdue team, but it's a Big Ten club with Big Ten talent. And I think this is going to be a fair fight. And I think there's an opportunity to see what Oregon State's defense is actually made of. Right now, we don't know. San Diego State came out with a freshman quarterback and could do nothing 2 weeks ago. And then on Saturday, Dylan Gabriel came out and did absolutely everything he wanted. Whatever you want, you can have it. So this coming game, maybe we'll learn a little bit about what this Oregon State defense is made of. One thing I do know for sure, the coaches are not happy with the space they've been giving in the secondary. Too much respect to the wide receivers. Receivers on Saturday just ran wild, and they're looking to tighten that up on Saturday. Maybe that opens up an opportunity. I don't know if Purdue's got the ability to do it or not, but with this super tight coverage, there might be an opportunity to break one. I don't know. I think Oregon State, honestly, would maybe, you don't want to give up a big play, but they'd rather that than be as soft as they've been a little bit in these early games.
Something for us to keep an eye on for sure. So push comes to shove, Les. How do you see this game unfolding when it kicks off, I think, 5:30 Pacific time on Saturday? How do you see it unfolding for us?
Not to be a homer, I think this is a game Oregon State should win. Purdue seems to be in a rebuilding mode. Again, hard to tell what you guys are made out of right now. I've had two games that are a lot like ours, non-competitive, one in each direction. So you haven't been in a real dogfight yet this year. So a lot to learn about them. I think this Oregon State team, they can run the ball. They've got a big, tough, experienced offensive line. Joshua Gray is a very good guard. He has been at tackle for them. He moved inside strictly because in the NFL he's going to be an interior lineman. He's a load, and they like to just load up and run behind him. I think they're going to have some success doing that. And defensively, I expect them to come out and they've got a lot. They don't want to leave that Oregon taste in their mouth. I think they want to come out and compete. I think this is a game Oregon State should win. I think for them to reach the goals they've got this season, I still think they think an 8-9 on the outside chance, a 10-win season is in play. This is a game they got to have.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Two sort of desperate teams, I guess, Les, Purdue and Oregon State coming off blowout losses. And I think the Beavs are about a 6-point favorite, 5-6-point favorite. So the odds makers like Oregon State as well. It's going to be very competitive, my friend. And I look forward to seeing you out there. We appreciate you stopping by and giving us some of your time very much, Les.
You're very, very welcome. We got a beautiful renovated new stadium, the second year in it. It's not overly large, especially by Big Ten standards, but it's nice. It's a fun place to watch a football game, and it should be a beautiful Saturday to watch some football.
Thank you, Les.
All right. Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Our thanks to Les Garrett for that fantastic preview of the Beavers. But looking ahead, weather-wise, it's looking like it's going to be a nice night in Corvallis. I guess it'll be more like an evening in Corvallis, as the game will kick off in around 5:30 Pacific time, so more like the evening hours for out west. Of course, here in central Indiana, the sun will already be down and it'll already be night, so clearly a night game for those of you watching from home on the CW. But let's go to David Seipel from WLFI, the meteorologist, with the game day forecast for Purdue and Oregon State.
Hello from News 18. I'm Storm Team 18 meteorologist David Seipel. The Boilermakers are heading west to play Oregon State in Corvallis, Oregon, with a kickoff time around 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. The weather on the Pacific Coast is looking fantastic for the Boilers. Morning temperatures will be in the upper 40s to low 50s with mostly sunny skies. By noon Pacific time, expect temperatures to be around the mid-60s with sunny skies and winds out of the north 5 to 10 miles per hour. High temperatures around kickoff will be about 74 degrees and comfortable. Winds will continue to be from the north at 10 miles per hour with sunshine and blue skies. By the end of the game, skies will remain clear and temperatures will fall back into the mid-60s. Overall, the weather is looking fantastic for some Boilermaker football. From News 18, I'm Storm Team 18 meteorologist David Seipel. Boiler up, hammer down.
I ended up grabbing one of those like light hoodies because I think I can get away with that on the sidelines on Saturday night. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't too chilly for the game. Luckily, unlike Tom, I've got a little bit to keep me warm up here, up top. He's off stage right now, so I don't think he's still listening to the show. Let's bring on another member of our Golden Black crew. It's our buddy Brian Neubert, who is wearing a hat, so we don't have to worry about how much hair Brian does or does not have. I wanted to mention this, Brian, not to dwell on the Notre Dame loss, right? Like it's kind of like Bill Belichick here on this show. Like we're on to Cincinnati, we're on to the Beavers here, but is there some staying power, to say the least? There have been some rough Notre Dame Purdue matchups in the past, right? 66-7 is a whole new level of roughness. So maybe that stain fades over time, but am I right in saying that that's a game that's going to stick around for a minute?
It should. I mean, if you're proud, competitive people, you shouldn't be, quote unquote, burning the tape and forgetting about that. You should sit in it. You should draw some positive from it. I mean, there are some parallels to be drawn, in this way with the basketball team losing to
Fairleigh Dickinson.
Thank you, Fairleigh Dickinson, yeah. A few years ago, and then channeling that into something positive last year. Very different sports, very different time frames, very different roster construction, and so on and so forth. But the point is that sometimes this sort of embarrassment can bring something a little more out of you, but it can also shine a light on what you have or don't have. And, Purdue's going to hope here that all that indignity that was experienced Saturday in Ross-Ade Stadium brings out a pretty decisive response.
And they're going to need it, because I don't want to be poly-pessimist here, but we were just talking, Tom and I, about this. If Purdue loses this game, suddenly you've got ranked Nebraska. You go at Wisconsin, against whom you've got a losing skid that is, I think, old enough to drink legally at this point, right? 20-something years.
Good way to put it.
At ranked Illinois, and a national title contender in Oregon comes to Ross-Ade. So those are your next four after this one. And I hate the term must win, right? It's cliche, it's overplayed, but honestly, Brian, if they can't find a way to beat Oregon State, and they're a 6-point dog, like it's not even close to a gimme. It's not even a coin flip game. I mean, Oregon State is a favorite here, but if they can't win this game, then we might be waiting. The pumpkins will be out and the Halloween costumes will be bought, I think, by the next time you're waiting for a Purdue victory, unfortunately.
Yeah, 6 is a big number, and I think that's probably Vegas, and it's those who partake in its activities probably overreacting to Purdue losing 66-7. At the same time, is it overreaction, or is it what Purdue is? And I think that's kind of the story of Purdue's trip to Oregon State here. Is we think Purdue is better than losing 66-7, right? But have we seen it against somebody other than Indiana State? We have not. So this kind of reminds me a little bit of Purdue going to Virginia Tech last year, in the sense that it's a beatable power conference. I don't know if I can call Oregon State a power conference anymore. There's two teams in their conference, but it's a peer level program. You're going to their place to play, and it's an opportunity for Purdue to show in a winnable game that it's going to be a competitive team this year. Purdue responded well to that rain delay at Virginia Tech last year, and I thought that sort of set a tone for the rest of the season. It didn't turn out that way, but this is an opportunity for Purdue to at least show a pulse kind of the rest of the way. And I think you probably need more than a pulse, because there's kind of a murderer's row waiting for you here, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, up to 6 now, Brian. Well, it will be up to 6. 6-pack, pack 6, with Boise and who else they got? Colorado State, San Diego State, and I'm missing one. But to your point, that's not exactly
UNLV, not Fresno State. I can't remember the other one.
Yeah. Not USC, UCLA, Oregon. You know what I mean? They can still call themselves the pack, I guess, but it's really not really the pack. Somebody else that I'm focused on, and this isn't, I don't think going to be a highlight of the matchup, because it's two teams that want to run the ball, but I don't want to give Hudson Card a free pass for last week. Everybody played poorly, and himself included. I don't think he had much of a chance to play well, is the problem. How much are you looking forward to seeing kind of how he responds here? Because we kind of talked about it last week. Oh, it's the biggest game of Hudson Card's career. And then, the entire house basically burns down, and that was that.
Yeah, it's I don't know how much of a chance he had. He made that one horrific decision to toss the ball away while he was getting sacked. Outside of that, he didn't really have any so little of it mattered, because it was very evident 10 minutes into that game, and I mean 10 minutes real time, not 10 minutes game time, that this was going to be a complete malfunction for Purdue, and that Notre Dame was just going to kind of run away with this. But I think that you have to kind of temper your thoughts on what he did against Notre Dame, on the fact that, it wasn't always, a lot of it was garbage time, and the offensive line didn't hold up. He didn't have protection. They had no running game, and everything starts with your ability to control the football, whether it be through your running game, through your short passing game, your high percentage completions. None of it worked. And it's really hard to judge the quarterback when the quarterback is so dependent on everybody around him. I know the world we live in, I know the sports culture we exist in suggests that it's all on the quarterback, and that's justifiable, because you win and lose with your quarterback. He's the most important player on the field. But in a game like that, when everything is just blowing up around you, it's kind of unfair. I think it was the tackling and it was the overall physicality of the game that really, really cost Purdue, or really, really did Purdue in. And I think singling out individuals is sort of a futile endeavor, because you could just basically run down the roster and take your pick. When we're asking questions about the punter after the game, that tells you what kind of day it was. And really, whether it be Hudson Card, whether it be anyone else that took the field for them on Saturday, they weren't good enough, and Purdue needs much better Saturday in Corvallis.
I feel like you're the perfect person to ask this question, because this question is not based on analysis or even football. It's just based on vibes. Based on vibes, I've always thought of Oregon State as kind of like kindred spirits of Purdue, right? Solid, but not spectacular histories, but certainly, not terrible ones. They've both had some memorable players. We were rattling them off with Tom, with Ocho Cinco and Hushmanzada and Steven Jackson, Jacquizz Rogers, remember from whatever year that was. And really proud fan bases with sort of an us against the world mentality. They're in the shadow, I think, a lot of the times nationally, of the in-state rival, based on vibes that maybe not because they're in the new glorified Mountain West and not a Power 4 conference anymore. But do you still think of Oregon State as, like, if you were to pick like a peer program to Purdue athletically, would Oregon State be in that mix?
I always thought Washington State kind of made some sense.
Quarterbacks, certainly.
Quarterback style of offense. Back in the Tiller years, there were a lot of connections between those two programs. Apparently, Pullman is out in the middle of nowhere in ag country, and that kind of aligns with Purdue's corn identity and stuff like that. But no, I totally get your point, where you're one of those kind of bottom half of your conference historically sort of teams that really aren't in the spotlight very often, but have had those moments where they've jumped up into it, and things like that. And that's what I was getting at before when I said this is a beatable peer level program. And I guess we're kind of talking about the same thing in that regard. But Purdue and Oregon State, I don't know how much history they have together. They used to recruit against one another periodically when Purdue was recruiting a lot of JUCOs out in California and things like that. But outside of that, there's just not been a lot of alignment between the two in terms of their history before this series anyway. And now that the Pac-12 has crumbled, the likelihood of Purdue meeting them in a Rose Bowl anytime soon is probably gone. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but I can't claim to have Oregon State's history top of mind right now. Chad Johnson is a good one. Ocho Cinco, I forgot he went there.
Yeah, no, and Alan Karpick, actually, I'm not going to spoil the surprise, but Alan's got a historical link with Oregon State that I had no idea that this game happened or existed, and it was actually very significant. They've only met twice. One of them was the 2021 game. Jeff Brom, I think that was the season opener, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they kind of, Purdue kind of held them off at Ross-Ade. I think it was an 8-9 point game, something like that. But they played a very historically significant game one other time. But again, I don't want to spoil it. That's Alan's segment, so we'll leave it to Alan.
Alan makes this stuff up.
Yeah,
I swear he's the only one who knows what happened in 1954 in these games. He makes up these players' names, and he just tells stories. He's sitting in his rocking chair at home. He's talking to his cats. He's making stuff up. I swear to you, he's making this stuff up. But I look forward to hearing what he has to say about this fictional Oregon State game that may or may not have happened before the Industrial Revolution.
We should run a disclaimer on every Golden Black Radio that we have not verified any of the information that we're talking about.
No, and we also add a disclaimer that I am making fun of Alan. I'm not calling into question the accuracy of his information. I am just making fun of my boss, which is what we should all be so lucky enough to be able to do publicly. I'm sure all of these games occurred. I'm sure all these players were real, no matter how fake some of the Notre Dame stories might have sounded. But no, I'm quite certain that this historical marker that occurred versus Oregon State is accurate.
Well, we got it coming up here in a couple of minutes. And Brian, we'll get the good vibes rolling, keep it rolling with our look at the Big Ten here in a few moments. But thanks so much for joining us here on Gold and Black Radio.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Dirk.
It's our pal Brian Neubert. And let's bring on the man himself, the publisher of goldenblack.com. It's Alan Karpick. Alan, you've never made up anything before. You are a walking encyclopedia fact machine. But I do find it interesting, just to give everybody kind of a peek behind the curtain here, Alan will text me or email me we have this segment where we do the historical look back of every matchup. And, the Big Ten ones, it's easy, right? Because they play a lot and there's 60, 70, 80 game sample sizes to go on, like Notre Dame last week. Oregon State, there's only a 2-game sample to go on. And I don't think the 2021 game was very relevant in the grand scheme of things, even though that turned into a great season for Purdue. But a game in 1967 in Ross-Ade Stadium actually was extremely historically significant for both programs.
It was, and I'm going to digress only to one thing. It's Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, and San Diego State are the 4 teams of the
gotcha.
Make the 6 pack. But the game in October of 1967, I was a whopping 7 years old, but I was there. And Purdue goes into that game ranked number 2 in the country. Oregon State had not had all of its miracle games by that point. It was a homecoming game, which was strange to have a homecoming game and not have a Big Ten game back in those days. And Purdue fumbled its way out of a chance of making a run at the national championship, losing that game 22-14 to DeAndros and the Oregon State Beavers. Now, what Oregon State did that year, and I know Brian Neubert doesn't care about this, but I know Derek Schultz does. So what happened was Oregon State went on and beat USC and the guy named O.J. Simpson, who won the national championship. They beat him 3-0 in a pitcher's duel up in Corvallis and tied UCLA that year as well. UCLA with Heisman Trophy quarterback Gary Beeben. So that is what happened. Purdue was a very devastating loss, even though it was a non-conference loss. You got to remember, that was the same Purdue team that beat Ohio State in Ohio Stadium, gave them the worst beating of their ever at that time, 41-6, and was ranked 2nd in the country. And of course, Indiana spoiled the end of that season for Purdue by beating the Boilermakers 19-14 to give the Hoosiers its only trip to Pasadena. So there you go.
Wow, that's crazy.
And I didn't make any of that up. I swear I did not make any of that up. I promise.
So many great moments that season. They beat number 1 Notre Dame. They win at Ohio State. And the 2 losses are to Oregon State and IU.
Right, and even the other team that tied for the Big Ten, that there was a three-way tie: Purdue, Indiana, and Minnesota. And of course, Indiana goes to the Rose Bowl because of the no repeat rule, and they had never been before. While Purdue wasn't eligible to go to the Rose Bowl in those days because you couldn't go back-to-back years, and yet Indiana beats Purdue in that last game, and Purdue crushed Minnesota. I mean, beat them 41-12 later in that year. That was a dominant Purdue team, arguably the best Purdue team in history, in its history, or at least in the modern era, I would say, an 8-2 record. And it was kind of disappointing it was hugely disappointing to lose to Oregon State and the Indiana that year.
Of course, this will be a road game at Oregon State where I don't believe Purdue has ever played before. I think both of the previous meetings, right, were at Ross-Ade Stadium in West Lafayette. They do have some history. I do remember the Ralph Bolden game, I think as it's known, at least in my living room, it's known as the Ralph Bolden game, a near win at Autzen Stadium when they had that home-and-home with Oregon in the late 2000s. I want to say that bridged the Tiller and Hope years, 08 and 09. But kind of take us through, Alan, Purdue's West Coast history, if you will, which I think we're going to be looking back on a lot more often now with UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington in the league.
Well, Tom Dienhart wrote a good story about Purdue's 1-7 record on the West Coast, and that means states that face the Pacific Ocean. Okay, we're defining that, and of course, Purdue's lone win was the Foster Farm Bowls. This is since 1979. The Boilermakers beat Arizona in that classic. Played in front of a Ladies' Day crowd of 11,000 people at San Francisco 49ers Stadium. But Purdue did win that game. You have to go back to 1970, the last time that Purdue won on the West Coast. They beat Stanford in the old Stanford Stadium. the Cardinal. They were the Indians at the time, politically incorrect maybe, but the Indians beat Purdue that game, or excuse me, Purdue beat Stanford 26-14. Stanford was ranked 3rd in the country and had the Heisman Trophy winner that year in Jim Plunkett. But Purdue's record has not been very good out west. But you're right, it is going to be. It's going to be an every year occurrence. I can remember a game in 1979, that first one that Tom talked about, Purdue, UCLA, Mark Herman, the Boilermakers go out there ranked 5th in the country. And this is going to tie to Brian Neubert here in just a second, so just hold tight. UCLA beats Purdue in the Smog Bowl. They was played in the Coliseum, and Purdue was a favorite in that game and just did not play well, was handled easily. And they introduced the country to a guy named Freeman McNeil. See, now I know that's going to get Brian's attention right there because he's a New York Jets guy. So, of course, then UCLA comes out and plays Purdue the next year and beats Purdue again, and McNeil runs crazy on Purdue. So, long story short is Purdue needs to play better on the West Coast. And for all the reasons that Tom and Brian have outlined here in the first segments here, Purdue really could stand to win that game on Saturday night in Corvallis.
Yeah, Freeman McNeil, known as pretty much the only good Jets first-round draft pick for like a 20-year period, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you may be right.
From about 1980 to 2000 there. It was kind of a rough period for Brian Neubert's old Jets there. Let's bring back Brian and bring back Tom as well as we kind of wrap up the show talking about the Big Ten for this week. I think you can go in a lot of different directions. There's kind of a sneaky fun – Michigan State's playing BC. Kind of a sneaky, fun game. I think this Purdue-Oregon State game is somewhat interesting as well. Anytime you have, two Power 4 adjacent programs play each other. But to me, guys, it's two teams that appear on Purdue's schedule coming up here, Illinois, Nebraska. Yeah. And I kind of want to know if I'm pretty sure Nebraska's for real. Maybe I should be giving Illinois a little bit more credit, but that's one that really jumps out to me this week.
Yeah, I got a chance to go over to Champaign and watch them play Kansas. And Brett Bielema's got a nice team. Luke Altmaier's looks like he's made some progress as a quarterback, salty defense. And, Brett Bielema, he wants to run the ball. He's about as old school as you can get. So, and you know what, guys, they're playing Champaign this year. The Boilermakers got to make that 90-minute trek west. And Brett would love to beat Ryan Walters, especially after getting beat last year. But Derek, to your point, this game is going to be a fun matchup between two programs that look to be on the ascent here. A good way to spend my Friday night, I think.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about UCLA, who you mentioned, Alan, going to LSU, because if they're 30 points worse than IU, and no offense, I think IU looks like a good football team, but if they're 30 points worse than IU, then I can't think of what LSU is going to do to them in Death Valley.
Well, and I'll take the turn and we'll let Mr. Neubert go for your next one. But yes, Indiana was very impressive. I watched a good portion of that game. It really looked good against UCLA. UCLA has nice looking uniforms and plays in a nice looking field, but boy, they aren't very good. I don't even want to think about. Of course, I didn't want to think about Purdue Notre Dame last week. I don't want to think about LSU UCLA, because that one really could get ugly, because LSU's got to be angry by now, right? So you would think that, and UCLA just doesn't seem to have enough to stay in the game at all. USC Michigan's going to be an interesting one too, but I'll let you hit Neubert with a game to watch.
I didn't know if are we going to do Ken O'Brien, or are we going to do games to watch? I didn't know if we were going to just name Jets draft picks from the 80s or what. Oh, wait, Brian, I think you're on mute there.
Well, get off the mute. He's still on mute. Still on mute. Can you? I don't think we can flick him off. There he's.
I went through the whole COVID season doing this, and I still haven't figured it out. That's my first ever unmute violation.
Not mine.
Anyway, I want some acknowledgement of University of Wisconsin-Madison product Al Toon and how good he was for the New York Jets in the 1980s.
Oh, he was good.
Fair.
Okay.
He was not
drafted
huge
in the
games
first against
round,
Purdue,
so
too.
That's not.
Wasn't a first-round pick, though. You're right.
What else were you asking me about?
Just in general, anything Big Ten-wise, something from last week, something you're looking forward to this week as we kind of bring this show to a close.
Yeah, just how bad UCLA seems to be. I guess you guys just mentioned it. I think Indiana's obviously done some really good things early. They've gotten a shot of energy from their new coach and their new coaching staff, but how do you lose that bad on your home field? I know they don't have much of a home field advantage, but wait to see what happens when they have to go to both Rutgers and Penn State in the span of 3 weeks here in a few weeks. It's kind of hard to see them winning a Big Ten game, to be honest with you. The Illinois-Nebraska game is probably the best game of the weekend, in my opinion. Boston College, Michigan State's up there too. I think that Nebraska-Illinois, I think Nebraska's for real. And I think,
me too.
I don't know how many of you guys watched the Nebraska-Colorado game, but when Matt Rule did his pregame TV interview, he had this little grin on his face, like he knew exactly what was going to happen. And that is exactly what happened, whatever that may have been. I think he knew he had a pretty good team, and he knew that they were going to exact the revenge on Colorado, exactly how they ended up doing so. And I think when a coach is that confident in his team, he's got a pretty good idea. He's got a good team, and I think Dylan Raiola has really energized that team. He's only a freshman; he's probably going to make some mistakes, but I think he's taken them to a different sort of level from a confidence perspective and things like that. And I think they're set up for a really good year and a really good run under Matt Rule these next few years. It's a perfect hire, the rare perfect hire in college football. They hit it out of the park. So that's I think that's the game of the week in the Big Ten, and I would expect Nebraska to win that game pretty comfortably.
Hey, real quick, we got Floyd of Rosedale. Easy for me to say.
Yeah, that'd be a good game too.
And two of the kind of sneaky ones. Rutgers getting a lot of hype, goes to Virginia Tech. I know Virginia Tech lost to Vandy, but still, let's see what Rutgers does in Blacksburg. I think it's going to be very interesting as well. And then we talked a little bit about the USC game, obviously, but must win for Lincoln Riley, most people think, and I think that's the case. I think he's got to win in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, it's actually kind of weird to have an Iowa-Minnesota game, and neither of those teams appear on the schedule. So it's kind of like, it's not that I'm not paying attention, right? It's just that I'm not paying attention probably as much as I would in a normal year. I'm still kind of mentally adjusting to the new age Big Ten here, but it should be a fun week and hopefully a fun one and a win for Purdue and Corvallis to kind of get this season back on track before it backslides anymore. Guys, we appreciate it. goldenblack.com is where you can find all of these handsome gentlemen and smiling faces for the best Purdue coverage all season long. Let's go ahead and bid adieu to our great sponsors who make Golden Black Radio possible every single week. Thanks to Purdue Federal Credit Union, the official credit card for Purdue fans, East End Grill and Ripple & Company, two distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street in Lafayette. The Whitaker Inn, this Midwestern oasis, perfect for a relaxing staycation or a weekend getaway, escape from the ordinary at Whitaker Inn. And Sand Valley Resort, where you can celebrate all that the wilderness provides this fall and winter at Sand Valley. Start planning your next winter getaway by visiting sandvalleypursuits.com. And, of course, on Saturday, don't miss the Saturday simulcast, where I won't be part of that, but, of course, Alan and the rest of the crew will have the recap of the Boilers and Beavers. And don't forget to become a subscriber at goldenblack.com, as I mentioned, for the very best in Purdue coverage. Until next time, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm Derek Schultz. This has been Golden Black Radio, and we will see you for the Saturday simulcast.